But when you get into debate in Speaker's Corner, very often there's a lot of trickery that is used, like false friends, for example. You know, to make points that are invalid. Given in the Tanakh, in the beginning, God. So it's the equivalent of God. Yeah? However, it's a plural. Allah is not a plural, it's a singular. So this is a plural. Elohim is a plural. These are false friends. These are false friends.
And I know that in the Old Testament, when it says God, it means God.
Yeah, because the plurality, it's actually foreshadowing the Trinity. It's this idea that the Trinity is in the Scripture.
And people might say, where? Where did we start seeing the Trinity in the Old Testament? I see it in the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, let's take that back into the Hebrew. It says, Elohim created. Elohim is the plural of God. It's gods. In the beginning, gods. But then the word created treats that word as if it's singular. In the beginning, gods created, as if it were singular. So right there at the very beginning of the Old Testament, you have plurality and singularity.
Another embarrassingly bad argument is pointing to the word Elohim and saying, see, that's teaching that there are multiple persons in God. No, no, no. Elohim is a strange word in Hebrew. It's grammatically plural, but can be singular or plural in meaning. And the way that you tell that it's singular or plural in meaning is by looking at the verbs and the adjectives that are put with it in a sentence. We have this type of thing in English. I've done a blog post about this before. If I go out and run around in the mud, I come inside, I'll say, these pants are dirty. And yet I'm only talking about one garment. If the football team goes out and plays a game in the mud, they come back into the locker room, take off their uniforms and give them to the guy that does the team's laundry, and he says, the pants are dirty. But in that context, he's referring to multiple garments, a whole team's worth. In English, notice we said these both times, and we said are both times, so we use the plural words to go along with it, and it just has a singular or plural meaning depending on the context, and we just figure it out. We don't have a lot of words like that in English, so it doesn't really cause confusion very often. But my understanding is that in Hebrew, if God or a single God is meant, they put it with singular verbs, in other words. And if gods is meant, if that's the meaning, plural, then they put it with plural verbs and other words. So, yeah, this is translated into English as God or gods, and it's usually just made clear by the surrounding grammar, or that plus the rest of the context. This doesn't teach multiple persons in God. It doesn't imply multiple persons in God. It doesn't even hint at multiple persons in God.
Talk to us about that a little bit.
Okay, there are certain Hebrew words, and these words have plural endings, but they don't necessarily have plural meanings. And to use an English example, we can talk about the word news. Mm-hmm. News is a singular as well as could be a plural, but just because it has an S ending doesn't mean that we automatically assume that. So it is in Hebrew, the word for face, panim, also has a plural ending, but it is a singular word. And same thing with heaven and water, mayim and hashemayim, or shemayim. So the idea of it having a plural ending doesn't necessitate a plural meaning. And besides, if Elohim did mean God in a plural sense, the plural of God is not a tripersonal God, but gods.
Yes, yeah.
And that's polytheism.
Yes.
Right? And so
Okay.
that's not very helpful for any of us to say that God is a plural. But also in Hebrew, as in many languages, probably most languages, the verb also contains a number in it, so singular or plural. Mm-hmm. And so we have good indications grammatically that Elohim is thought of as a singular when it's applied to Yahweh, the God of the Creator God, mm-hmm. And so that's because the verb is actually singular. So it says in the beginning here, of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word created there could either be a singular or plural, and it's singular, even though the word Elohim is technically a plural form. But here it has a singular meaning, and that's why every single Bible translation under the sun says God instead of gods for Elohim.
Yes, I see.
And so this is not something that we discovered on our own. This is something that's readily accessible if you check mainstream commentaries, or, for example, I looked it up in the Wycliffe Dictionary of Theology, and they say it's the plural of plenitude, and that's the idea that God is so magnificent, so majestic, so powerful, that you give him a plural form for the word God, but it has a singular meaning.
So we're talking about an amazing, wonderful individual who is God, but not individuals who are God. There's nothing in the word Elohim that would bring us to the conclusion that somehow God is multiple persons.
Right. I think with Elohim we have two options, and these are the two options the translators use. Either translate it God or gods. And frequently when pagan gods, for example, are in view, Elohim will be translated gods. But when it's Yahweh who's being spoken of, it's always translated God in every translation done by anybody that I've ever seen.
And used with the singular verbs and singular pronouns.
Used with singular verbs. And we can also look at a parallel by looking at Dagon or Chemosh or Milcom, or Asherah or Baal. We look at these other pagan gods, and they're all called Elohim too, as individuals. And so it was just a common word for God in their time, and it communicated this sense of majesty and power.
Wow, I like that. One thing I've noticed too about this idea of Elohim meaning somehow persons, this odd notion, no one in the Bible ever makes that point. No one ever says, oh, by the way, Elohim is a reference to multiple. Jesus never says such a thing. None of the apostles, none of the prophets. No one ever says that. So it seems like it's a post-biblical thing developed to support a post-biblical multiple-person God idea.